Welcome to this Gwyl Crime Cymru Festival event, and welcome to Aberystwyth. Croeso i'r digwyddiad Gwyl Crime Cymru Festival hwn, a chroeso I Aberystwyth. Aberystwyth, the cultural capital of Wales, home to Aberystwyth University and the National Library of Wales, once home to Welsh princes. The Biarritz of Wales is the jewel in the crown of Cardigan Bay's stunning coastline and home to hugely successful TV drama Hinterland. And now, the streets that have become familiar to fictional D.I. Mathias's many fans are getting ready to welcome celebrities from the worlds of crime fiction and crime drama, because Aberystwyth is home to Wales's first ever international crime fiction event, Gwyl Crime Cymru Festival. During the early May bank holiday weekend of 2022, Aber, as the town is affectionately known, will play host to a multitude of events that will offer something for every fan of crime fiction and drama. Internationally successful authors will entertain and meet readers in historic buildings. Pub quizzes will bring together authors and readers. Writing workshops, meet the agent sessions, and informal readings will help encourage and develop new writing talent. And in sparkling celebration of new Welsh talent, a champagne reception for Crime Cymru's first crime novel competition winners. This will be an Aberbank holiday weekend like no other. So, come for the crime fiction and take Cymru home in your hearts. Rydym yn edrych ymlaen yn fawr iawn at eich croesawu I Aberystwyth ac I Geredigion.
Noswaith dda pawb, a chroeso i'r digwyddiad olaf Gwyl Crime Cymru Festival eleni. Good evening everybody, and welcome to the last event of the first ever Gwyl Crime Cymru Festival online. I'm Alis Hawkins, co-chair of Crime Cymru, and it's my pleasure to welcome you tonight on behalf of Crime Cymru and our wonderfully supportive festival partners, Aberystwyth Town Council. As you'll hopefully have seen from your Eventbrite emails, we're highlighting a different independent Welsh bookshop at each event. And tonight we're featuring Gwyl Bookworm from Aberaeron. If you like the sound of any of the books we discussed this evening, please do consider ordering from them. You'll find a click-through link on the programme page of the festival website. This evening, I'm genuinely thrilled to be joined by two outstanding authors of crime fiction. M W Craven, Mike, is what my sister-in-law would call a proper northerner. He was born in Carlisle and grew up in Newcastle. At 16, he ran away to join the army, where he spent 10 years travelling the world and having fun. When he left, after a bit of looking about to see what else might be fun, he did a degree in social work, specialising in criminology and substance misuse. After 16 years rising through the ranks of the Cumbrian Probation Service, he decided that it was time for fun of a different kind and jumped ship to become a full-time author. I don't know if he's looked back since, but his readers certainly haven't. His novels featuring Washington Poe and Tilly Bradshaw have all been longlisted for the Crime Writers Association Gold Dagger, and the Puppet Show won the award in 2019. His new novel, Dead Ground, which is due out in June, is already causing a huge amount of excitement among his fans. Welcome to Gwyl Crime Cymru Festival, Mike.
Hello, Alice. Good evening.
Great to have you with us. Any Welsh connections, apart from the fact that Cumbria and Cymru come from the same root?
They do. I mean, I'll talk about it later, actually, when we're in the Welsh section, because Wales and Cumbria got mixed up remarkably often in central London. So some really quite embarrassing mishaps could have happened, some quite dangerous mishaps actually, but we can talk about that later. And I'm ex-army, so I know the Brecon beacons better than I would like.
Great, yes, we'll definitely talk about that later. Our other guest, Imran Mahmood, was born in Liverpool and now lives in London with his wife and daughter. Imran has the ideal job for a crime writer, as he's a criminal defence barrister with over 20 years' experience in the Crown Court and Court of Appeal. He specialises in legal aid cases involving violent crimes, fraud and sexual offences. Imran's first novel, You Don't Know Me, published in 2017, was longlisted for the Crime Writers Association Gold Dagger, the Theakston's Crime Novel of the Year Award, and the Goldsborough Glass Bell Award, which celebrates the best storytelling across all contemporary crime fiction genres. You Don't Know Me is also in the process of being dramatised for the BBC and Netflix. Imran's most recent novel, I Know What I Saw, is already getting rave reviews ahead of publication in June, and if there's any justice in the world at all, it'll be on several prize long lists in due course. Welcome to Gwyl Crime Cymru Festival, Imran.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much indeed. I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you. Liverpool, that's on North Wales' doorstep. Do you have any Welsh connections?
Well, it is right on the doorstep. And when I was at school, at primary school and at secondary school, we often went into North Wales for school trips. So I've always had a long-standing love for Wales. I think it's beautiful.
Good to hear. Good to hear. As I mentioned, You Don't Know Me is being televised, and I know work's already started. In the past, you've jokingly suggested that John Boyega would be a good choice for your central character. Can you give us any advance information about casting?
I've been asked to keep it quiet.
Oh, the NDAs, terrible. Do you have any reservations about seeing your work on telly?
No, not really. I was lucky enough to be invited along onto set, so I was able to watch some of it being filmed, and it was incredible how many people are involved. Hundreds of people are involved just to bring, something that was once in my head live onto the screen. It was a very surreal experience.
I know, yeah, very weird. What about you, Mike? If TV company offered you lots of money to adapt one of yours, would you have reservations, do you think? Would you want creative control, that sort of thing?
I've only just had the options sent back to me, actually, and the script that the guy had written for the puppet show, because it was optioned a year before the puppet show was released. It was optioned in 2017, and he had. I mean, he's a nice bloke, and I met him, but he had never stepped out of London in his life. If you ask me, because his opening scene had Poe having a bath, in a tin bath outside. Which I thought, well, okay. I mean, it's getting on the verge of offensive. I mean, it was quite a funny scene, but it was not. I certainly didn't like that, and I wouldn't have written that. So I'm sort of quite glad to get them back, actually, and I would want a bit more control next time. And there's a lot more material to work with. But by the time, I mean, there's 6 Poe books in the pipeline.
Right.
I've written 6. I mean, the 4th one's not even out yet, and I've written 6. So.
Oh, that is news to this particular fan's ears. That's absolutely great. Everybody's talking about Line of Duty at the moment. I know I'm not a fan, actually, but I know last night's finales caused a huge amount of furore. I mean, obviously, that wasn't a novel adaptation. It was written specifically for telly. But do you think novel adaptations compare favourably with stuff that's specifically written for TV? Imran, what do you think?
I think it probably varies, and it probably a lot to do with who the screenwriter is. I think that's really important. And some books are better suited, I think, for adaptations than others. I know that if you take some books where I've spoken to producers who've said, yeah, we can't really do this on TV because of the way that it's been written. Or if you're talking about somebody's loss of memory, it's quite hard to translate that onto screen. So I think it depends. I think there have been some really, really good ones. Line of Duty was a problem, I think. I think it started off really well. And the first few seasons I thought were brilliant. And Jed Mercurio writes, so kind of well, very, very tightly written scenes. But I think towards the end, they probably just ran out of options about who.
It got a bit too actiony, didn't it? When they started having Kate shooting someone at distance with a rifle when Caddy died and all that type of stuff. I thought it was getting a bit, and they didn't really have anywhere to go then, because when they started doing that, then they've got to keep on ramping it up, which was obviously going to cause a problem last night, because last night was, which I actually thought was quite a clever ending, if you take the body of work as a whole, because it was the most plausible ending, rather than have this uber villain, super genius James Bond type thing in his secret volcano. It was just a corrupt man who was being protected by other corrupt men, and he was passing on information. So it was quite clever. I mean, there's been a couple of outstanding adaptations. The Bosch, Harry Bosch, Michael Connelly's Bosch series is absolutely brilliant. Mr. Mercedes, the Stephen King adaptation, is absolutely brilliant as well. But I think what Imran was saying, it comes down to good writing is good writing at the end of the day, and bad writing on the screen or on the page is bad writing, and it'll show.
Yeah.
Stephen King was famously not a fan of the adaptation of The Shining. He absolutely
No.
and still hates it.
Mm.
But there are a lot of people who watch it who love it. So I think it probably varies from person to person depending on what their taste is.
Absolutely, and people who like films or television adaptations of books don't necessarily like the books, and vice versa. So it's maybe horses for courses. But anyway, speaking of books, let's get to your books. But before we drill down to the nitty gritty, I'm going to get you both to do a quick elevator pitch of your latest book. So Imran, would you like to encapsulate I Know What I Saw for us in a pithy minute or so, please?
Yeah, I'll try my best. I Know What I Saw is it's set in London, and it stars a man who was once a wealthy banker, and something's happened to him. We don't quite know what early on, and he's reduced to living on the streets. And one day it's raining very heavily, and in order to get out of the rain, he hides in a flat in Mayfair, which he thinks is empty. And just as he's drying off, he hears a noise, dives behind the sofa, and while he's hiding there, the occupants come in, and he witnesses a murder. And then ultimately he runs out, tries to report it to the police, and the police don't believe him, partly because of who he is now and how he presents, but also because when they return to the flat, and everything that he's described, none of what he's described is there when the police turn up. There's no body, the flat's different, everything's a mystery.
So clever, so clever. I wasn't sure how you were going to top You Don't Know Who I Am, or You Don't Know Me, sorry, but you have. I was blown away by it, to be honest. Mike, for anybody out there watching who isn't already salivating at the thought of a new Poe and Tilly book, now's your chance to hook them into dead ground.
Well, before I start, I'm just going to say Imran's new one's absolutely fantastic. I got a copy back end of last year, I think, and it's one of the best books I've read for a long time. It really is good, and it's so different to You Don't Know Me, but it's still got that sort of Imran, because I mean the writing's absolutely beautiful in it as well, which is always a bonus, particularly with my writer's head on. Anyway, enough about him. Dead Ground, it's the 4th Poe and Tilly book. It's out June the 3rd, so a month today. It's after the event, it leads on after the events of the Creator, which is the 3rd book. And yes, you haven't read it yet, though, Imran, so stop taunting me. It's so there's some things that happened in the Creator which I sort of alluded to, but they're not really explained. So Poe and Tilly are picking up the aftermaths, but it starts not with Poe and Tilly. It starts with a heist in Southampton, where a group of guys in James Bond masks break into a safety deposit box room. It's going flawlessly, but they're not actually there to steal anything. They're there to kill somebody right in the middle. And then it goes back to Poe and Tilly, and they end up getting dragged into a joint. Actually, Poe ends up leading a joint police, FBI, and security services investigation into the death of a helicopter pilot who is ferrying VIPs backwards and forwards at a important trade summit in Cumbria, and this pilot gets murdered in a brothel, and it's what links it to the heist, what's going on. Why does nothing in his background check out despite being vetted for this incredibly high profile job? And it just goes from there. And it's a typical Tilly. And actually, my agent says it's more of a Tilly book. This one, there's a lot of quite funny one-liners in it, I think, which I think will please a lot of Tilly fans.
Of which I am one. I mean, massive Poe and Tilly fan. You say it begins with the heist. It actually begins with Poe in court. He's about to lose the place he lives. What is it with you, Mike, and people who build their own houses and then look likely to lose them? Because you did the same with Avis and Fluke.
I did. I mean, what you've got to remember is nobody was ever supposed to read the Fluke books. So I just stole all the ideas out of the first two books that I liked and put them into the because you'll notice that Fluke's girlfriend bears a striking resemblance to Estelle Doyle, the pathologist. You're absolutely right about the home, but of course then Little Brown decided they wanted everything I'd written, so they acquired the Fluke series and released them, so a lot more people have read them, to the point I had to actually rewrite the ending of Born in the Burial Gown, the first Fluke book, because I'd stolen the central twist to use in the curator, so I had to come up with a completely different solution, which involves a left-handed guitar, if anyone's interested.
Yes, the left-handed guitar, the clue of the left-handed guitar and the notebook being in the wrong place.
Which I actually got wrong. It wasn't until the narrator was going through. It says, you do realise that's absolutely wrong. So we had to, it was about 6 hours before it actually went to print, so we had to quickly rush around and change it. Because I'd looked up the first thing on the internet, WikiHow actually. I said, which way are the guitars stringed on a left-handed guitar? Oh, that must be right.
Oh dear, that is quite hilarious. Okay, so thinking about the title of this event, let's have a think about how much fact and how much fiction there is in your books. It seems to me that your books sit at roughly opposite ends of the whodunit spectrum. On the one hand, with Imran, you've got murders which seem to me pretty well reflect how people actually do tend to die at the hands of others. They're kind of unplanned, in the heat of the moment. And on the other, you've got yours, Mike, with the highly choreographed, carefully arranged, forensically aware murders. So, Mike, given that your murders aren't standard police fare, if I can put it like that, how important is it to you to make the procedural part of things realistic? It's one of those things, Alice. I think when you can get it right, then there's no reason not to get it right. And sometimes I will gloss over things because they don't quite fit, but I'll normally sandwich them between things that actually are correct so that you don't actually notice. But I mean, my editor calls it crime plus. So it's not. I mean, the monsters that Poe and Tilly hunt don't really exist, or you would hope they don't exist in real life. It is quite over the top, and it's not meant to be taken too seriously. But that said, I'm always going to work within the parameters of what is legally, or what is physically available, because Poe doesn't always do what's legally correct, but that is one of the beauties about living in Cumbria, actually, and possibly for some of the writers in rural Wales, in that the tools of the state that crime writers writing in the cities and the bigger urban areas, they aren't available in Cumbria. So there's not the saturation CCTV, the number plate cameras, although I did use them in the puppet show, that don't have the saturation coverage that there is. The mobile phone masts aren't as densely populated, so it's much harder to triangulate signals and all that type of stuff. So that makes you work a bit harder, actually makes the detectives work a bit harder. And so you get more old-fashioned police work, more intuition, more interviewing suspects, rather than just sitting in front of a computer all day, which is incidentally what Tilly does most of the time. She does it. She does things that others can't do. Anyway, so yeah, I'll get it right when I can, and I'll often know when I don't get it right. And then if I don't get it right, someone will email me to tell me anyway. There was a fireman emailed me after the puppet show, so that wouldn't happen. I was like, okay. Calm down. Yes, quite. But obviously, with Poe and Tilly now working for these rather high-level, kind of nebulous people, maybe people just don't know what the procedures are. It's not like they're working for the standard police, is it?
Well, I mean, the unit actually does exist.
Okay.
There's no police in it.
Right.
And because Poe and Tilly work with the security services in Dead Ground, and you can't even find that the northern headquarters of MI5 does exist, but nobody knows where it is. Briefly, they did, because as I say in the book, the builders who were contracted to put the building up actually put it on their website for a short bit until they were told to take it down because we were breaching the Official Secrets Act. So I just had to make it up what I thought it might look like inside, and I had a bit of fun then, because the people who know won't be allowed to contradict me anyway. So it's like what McCarran does with his Slow Horses series. It's his world. He can just do what he wants.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Imran, I suppose the opposite question for you in a way, given that the death in I Know What I Saw is almost mundane, what is it about the story that makes the reader want to turn the pages? Because we really do want to turn those pages.
Because of my day job, I'm surrounded by crime. I'm surrounded by real murders and real violence. And well, one of the things I've noticed is that fact is often stranger than fiction, and it's often kind of more bizarre. And so as I'm writing, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to just latch on to the kind of that bit of human nature which separates us from the criminal, because it feels to me that we're always just a hair's breadth away from that descent into criminality. And I'm always thinking there, but for the grace of God, there I go. So what I try and do is I try and keep the crime grounded in some kind of reality. I mean, I have a lot of, I'm very impressed with people like Mike who can use their imagination so well and come up with these kind of beautiful scenarios which work so well. I don't have that kind of brain, so I'm not very good at imagining that kind of thing. So most of what I do is I'm trying to stop it from seeming absurd, and I find that quite difficult because real life is so bizarre. I remember doing a case once which, if I wrote it and you read it, you'd think that's ridiculous. Nobody that would never happen in the real world. One which sticks in my mind is I had a client who was Mr. Singh. For the purpose of this story, I won't use his real name, but I'll call him Mike Singh. Mike Singh's wife took out 4 life insurance policies on him, and then Mike Singh went to India to fake his own death. Mike Singh's wife came back with the death certificate. So the insurance company were investigating, and they turned up at Mike Singh's now deceased house, and the door opens, and Craven Singh opens the door, and so they say, "Are you Mike Singh?" And he says, "No, I'm not Mike Singh. Mike Singh's my brother. Mike Singh's dead." So they said, "Well, I think we need to get the police involved." So the police come along, and they take him away. They interview him, and they say, "Are you Mike Singh?" And he says, "No, I'm Craven Singh." And they say, "Well, why are you in his house?" And he says, well, I just thought I'd come for a visit." And they said, "Well, but you're with his wife and child, and you're sharing his wife's bed." And he said, "Well, there's a tradition in our village in India where the brother has to look after the widow of his." So he says, "Well, that's why I'm here." So then, anyway, in the end, they ended up doing a DNA test on the son, and they said he shares the same DNA as you. He's got your DNA. And he said, "Well, that's because 30 years ago, I came for a visit to my brother's house, and me and his wife ended up having an affair for the week I was there, and that accounts for the DNA." And all the way along this, he was just coming out with more and more. So, and in the end, he was caught by something really mundane, which was the police officers say, "This is your passport," and he says, "Yes, that's my passport." And they show him Mike Singh's passport, and they say, "This guy is very similar to this guy," and they say, "And in fact, you're wearing the same clothes." In the photographs, 2 passport photographs, they're in the same clothes, but and so what I end up doing is I'll come up with a scenario of a murder, or it'd be similar to something that I've worked on. And then all the way along, what I'm trying to do is trying to stop it from descending into the absurd. And I find that quite difficult, because I'm always thinking, does this feel so too coincidental? Is this kind of placement of plot here too convenient? So that's what I try and do. I don't know whether I always achieve it, but that's my aim.
No, I think you do achieve it, but it's really interesting that you should be talking about real crimes that just seem unbelievable. I mean, I know that you've said you did an interview when You Don't Know Me came out, and you talked about exploding preconceptions about the kind of person your main character is and his life. Are you trying to do the same in I Know What I Saw with Xander Shute? I mean, he's not your average, not that there is an average homeless person, but he's an ex-banker. He's not the sort of person you expect to end up on the streets.
Yeah, in fact, that was exactly what I was going for, because I think there is this danger of stereotyping, and people are homeless, particularly today, for a million different reasons. People can be working and still homeless. They can have full-time jobs and still be homeless, particularly in London, where house prices are so high and communities are so disparate and the support is so lacking. And I just wanted to shine a light on that issue, so that we can begin to take people at face value. And I wondered what it was that gave a person value. Was it the fact that they're in a house, or that they have money, or that they have a job? Or is there something more intrinsic which gives a person value? And the character Xander Shute, in fact, came from somebody I met when I was a child. 15 years old I was, and in a library in Liverpool, there was this man. We used to call them back then tramps. Mike still does.
I'm not getting into this again.
But he used to come in, and he was almost exactly how you'd kind of imagine. He had the long beard, he had the big overcoat, and he stank to high heaven. And he'd come into the library and he'd sit in the chairs, and I'd kind of walk past him, and he'd always be reading physics magazines, or The New Scientist, or medical journals. And I used to think, why is he reading quite high kind of brow literature? And he'd read French books. And in fact, he introduced me to Proust back then. And what had happened was I began to talk to him, and he was obviously very bright, and he'd exploded all of my preconceptions of what it meant to be a homeless person, as I called them then, a tramp. And I was baffled by it, because I found out from my French teacher that this guy had been their star student. He'd got all A's in his A levels. He'd got a double first from Oxford College, and he was exceptionally bright. And I couldn't work out what led him to this. And I remember having these conversations with him. I'd say to him, "But why are you here?" And he'd say, "Well, because I want to be." I'd say, "But you could be rich." And he'd say, "Yeah, it could be, but I don't want to be. I've decided that this is a life that I want." And it was an education. I probably wasn't ready for it then. And it took a lifetime to understand what he was saying to me, which was that there were different ways of evaluating the worth of a human being. And the character stayed with me, and the story stayed with me, and ultimately I wrote it for that reason, because I couldn't get him out of my head.
Interesting. So you're the kid in the book who interacts with Xander, yeah.
Yeah, possibly. In fact, what he'd done to me was that he turned up and said, "Do you want to buy a French dictionary?" And I wondered where he was getting a French dictionary. And Camus, and he would have all of these tiny books, Jean-Paul Sartre and Molière, and these tiny books in French, and he'd want to sell them to me. And it was only once I bought 5 or 6 of them, I thought, hang on a second, we're in a library. Getting them from the library. But he had his own stash of books, and he'd keep his stuff at his friend's house, and which I thought also, I found it quite touching. You know, that the friend would put him up and give him a bath every now and then and buy him food, and then kind of let him go out into the wilds whenever he wanted to.
Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Mike, are you in the business of exploding stereotypes and preconceptions too? I mean, when you think of somebody who works in tech support or is a genius at tech, you don't think young woman, you think pale, bespectacled, slightly spotty young man. Where did Tilly Bradshaw come from? Why did you decide to give a female foil to Washington Poe?
I think the answer probably goes back to the Fluke series, actually, when I signed with my agent in between the two Fluke books, and he initially wanted me to rewrite Body Breaker as the first in a new series. That's just gonna be too hard, David. I'll just write a brand new series from scratch. But he still wanted it set in Cumbria because that was quite sellable then. But I didn't, and I enjoyed writing Fluke's character. I enjoyed the sort of grumpiness and the sort of intuition side. So I thought I'll do something similar with my lead. But I couldn't replicate Matt Towler, who was an ex-para, very violent, absolutely foul, non-PC. So I went the other way for Poe's. I don't want to say sidekick. We'll say partner. But when I initially wrote Tilly, she wasn't as naive and sweet as she is, as she appears on the page, and that's because I didn't actually have a name for my character for Poe's first name. Actually, I didn't have a name at all until I misheard. So I was laughing at something in the Washington Post. Somebody said to me, "What are you laughing at?" I said something in the Washington Post. They said, "What's the Washington Poe?" I thought, and you know, when you hear something, you think, "That's my name. That is my name." It's like when a Lee Child and his wife said, "You make a good reacher," that type of thing. But of course, you can't call a Cumbrian Washington without explaining why you call them Washington. So I had to go back and do that. And for those who've read the puppet show, you'll know the explanation is actually very dark. The reason why he was named the way he was. So I had to sort of balance that. I went back and rewrote Tilly, who at that point was quite streetwise. She was more of Elizabeth Sander type character rather than the sort of I suppose near a Holly Gibney, I suppose, if you're gonna choose. So I rewrote her, and then about halfway through the second draft, I thought I've got something quite cool here, and I can see this, and also because Poe doesn't understand technology, and I don't understand technology, I get Tilly to explain it to him in a very using very accessible language, which therefore explains it to the readers. So you can get across some quite complicated stuff without actually being patronising to the readers, because it's actually Tilly patronising Poe, which is always fun. And it also means I can go a bit darker than I could normally get away with, because Tilly's always there to say something absolutely outrageous, unwittingly lightening the mood. So that's pretty much why we got, although she is pale and bespeckled, so I didn't go too far from the stereotype.
Just thinking about Tilly and who she is, and also Xander, it may be because I've spent the last 7 or 8 years working for the National Autistic Society, but I see some quite distinct autistic traits in both Tilly and Xander. Am I making that up, or are they really there?
Well, I've never said, and I never will, if Tilly's on the spectrum.
No.
I know I was at Capital Crime, I think, in whenever it was, and Imran was trying to get me to just admit, just go on, just tell me, I won't tell anyone. So I'm not. So yeah, for me, I mean, because when I was a social worker, when I was a social student, actually, I did a placement with an autistic a school for autistic children in Sunderland. So I got to sort of read up and study it, and I did some papers on it. So I know, and you will speak to some experts who'll say everyone's on the spectrum at some level. So I mean, it's just
no, not true. Talk to any autistic person; they find that quite insulting, actually. That everybody would claim that. It's like saying, "Oh, I wear reading glasses, everybody's blind." That's their analogy. They're not happy with that at all, the autistic community.
Well, that's fair enough.
Yeah. What about Xander Shoot, Imran? Did you ever feel that about him?
Well, what I certainly thought about him was that if he wasn't on the spectrum, that he could definitely see it from where he was. There's definitely something there. And in fact, now that you mentioned it, it brings to mind actually some of the clients I've represented who were very firmly on the spectrum, and there are probably traits that I have picked out. Just to kind of weave it into the character to give it some depth. I find it, extremely interesting as a subject, and this is why I was trying to pin Mike down when I saw him at Capital Punishment. Because I was sure, that he'd written because Tilly is an outstanding and astonishing achievement, I think, in terms of character. I don't think I've ever read a character as well-rounded, as kind of beautifully drawn as Tilly, and she has, she's, as far as I'm concerned, when I'm reading her, more than any other character I've ever read, she's real, and I don't quite know how he's managed it. There's a kind of bit of magic there, which she
we call it luck in our house.
Yeah, I agree, Imran. I love Tilly. I think she's great. I mean, Washington Poe is great too in his own way, but I think it's Tilly that I read the books for on the whole. It's interesting that you two have obviously met before and talk about all these things. I get the impression from reading your books that maybe the two of you have got different ideas about what crime fiction is for. Do you think crime fiction has a higher purpose than simple entertainment, Mike?
I think some authors do think that, and that's fine. And some authors will only write about issues that are personally bothering them, or the social issue of the day, and that's absolutely fine. And it's, I mean, one of the reasons I don't tend to go too realistic with my crimes is because I did 16 years as probation. I don't want to read about, I don't want to write about the stuff I was doing every day for 16 years. Whether or not we have a responsibility or anything, I think it's up to the individual author to decide whether they want to sort of put a message into their work, or whether there's a sort of a higher purpose to what we do. I personally don't. My job, the way I see it, is to be as entertaining as I can. But then again, I'm writing completely different books to Imran. Because when I read You Don't Know Me, that did open my eyes to the sort of inner city violence, and again the homeless guy in I Know What I Saw. That was it was a very well researched, or apparently it's not just Imran telling the story of his childhood. But at the time I thought it was a very well researched. But it's also a cracking story. So I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I think it's up to each individual author.
Yeah. What about you, Imran? Do you feel like there's a higher purpose to what you do?
It never starts out like that. For me, I know what I saw. The thing that had been plaguing me was I'd been reading a lot of books about memory. And I'd had these clients who'd had problems with their memory. And I just began to kind of wind that around a bit. And the thing that I wondered was, since we are really just a collection of memories, and each night we go to sleep and our brains process all the information of the day before, and kind of we absorb it into our psyches, and the next day we've just become a bit more coloured in a version than we were yesterday. And then I thought, if we start to lose our memories, or if our memories begin to become fragmented, does that mean that who we are, that changes, and so that we're no longer who we were yesterday if our memories aren't there to hold us together? And so I began to wonder about that, and then I thought, what are the kinds of things that might render somebody's memory more fragile? Because some part of me always believes that we're kind of hanging on by a thread, or I do. I always think I'm hanging on to sanity by a thread, and I just wonder you know, all it takes is a small cut and we can descend into an abyss. And I suppose I'm slightly terrified about that it only takes a wrong turn and then we're there kind of in the darkness. And there's so much darkness around. And there are so many people who seem to me as lost as I am on some days. And I just wanted to explore that. And crime's I think is a great way of doing it, because you can do it at the same time as telling the story. And I think if you're reading kind of standard literary fiction, you know what you're in for. You know what you're getting. Everybody knows that they're setting up this premise, and they're going to feed you through it. And this is whatever the great themes are, you're going to be told them. But I think in crime fiction, you can tell the story and kind of carry along the themes with you. And kind of, I suppose for me, it's just a way of getting it out of my psyche. And I have to say, initially, I didn't know that Mike worked as a in the probation service, because whenever he said to me, I spent a lot of time in prison, I'd always thought that he was. He always looked at me as if he kind of recognised me. I always thought he was on my side.
Oh, you guys, the banter.
Just a quick one. I met Imran at Bradford Literary Festival, and we were doing this panel together. So this would be 2018, was it, Imran?
Yeah.
And it's the only panel that I've been heckled at. Now, I can't tell this story because it was an Asian lady was doing the heckling, but Imran tells it beautifully, but it was absolutely hilarious. I do know that when the moderator asked us to read some of our story, I went first and I got heckled, asked why I wasn't reading Harry Potter, which was an extraordinary, so that was one of my first panels as well. I thought, are they all like this?
This is totally true. We were in this panel and this, I'll say crazy, guardedly, but she was crazy. This crazy woman in the audience said, as Mike was reading, we said, "What are you reading from?" And he said, "I'm reading from my book." And she said, "And what are the other people reading from?" And I said, "Well, we're all reading from our book." And she said, "What, so you're trying to tell me that the three of you got together to write one book?" And I said, "No, we wrote our own books." So then when I started reading bits of mine, she said, "What are you reading?" I said, "I'm reading my book." She said, "Do you know what kind of woman I am that you can sit here and read to me stories about murder and knives and guns? Who do you think I am?" Well, in fairness, you have come to a crime festival.
You do get the weird and the wonderful at crime festivals. I find, especially if they're done in libraries, there's something about libraries which seems to attract all sorts of people, let's say. I'm very aware that time is not on our side here. So I'm going to come, Mike knows this because he's been watching all week, or his wife has anyway. I don't know if you have, Imran, but we're asking a Welsh question every night. And I've got a bit sick of hearing what people like to drink. Penderyn whiskey has been mentioned a lot, or who their favourite actor is. So I'm going for something a bit more topical. I don't know if everybody who's listening has heard, but a petition has been launched about the name of our highest mountain in Wales. The petitioners want only Snowdon's Welsh name to be used in Wales, Yr Wyddfa, instead of Snowdon. But then a travel writer called Hugh Morris weighed in and said Snowdon didn't deserve a Welsh name because Wales had let it down by building a cafe at the top of the mountain. He said you'd never get a cafe on top of Scaffell Pike or Ben Nevis. So I'm asking you two now, have we as Welsh people disrespected our country by providing somewhere for people to sit in the warm after a 6-hour climb? Mike, let's start with you.
I mean, part of me thinks this is a story about nothing. The other part of me thinks it's actually quite serious, and it's sort of, there's a bit of whatever it's called. The Welsh should be allowed to call their mountains what they want. If you spin back, I mean, I think it was called Snowdoon first, wasn't it? About 200 years before the Welsh name, which Snowdoon actually sounds like me talking to my wife when we're driving. Snowdoon. So I mean, the disrespect thing. I've had, to be fair, I've had a look at the cafe because you sent links, and it's not the nicest looking thing, but it's on top of a really high mountain in quite a windy part of the country, so you're never going to get a nice looking thing. I mean, I don't know. I think part of it's very silly. I think the more important point was the way they were mocking it on Have I Got News For You. I mean, that was just, it was bordering on unpleasant, and it certainly wasn't funny. And no. I mean, it's quite a liberal show, Have I Got News For You, normally, and it was just lazy. Lazy, right? And I'm surprised that the actual it was what you call him, Xander, wasn't it? I was surprised he actually agreed to say it. To be honest.
What do you reckon, Imran?
I agree with Mike because on the one hand, it does seem a bit like a bit of silliness, but on the other hand, I think it does raise some serious questions, and I think the starting point has to be that the Welsh language is, first of all, I think it's a remarkable thing that the Welsh have managed to properly hold on to their language, and it's something that's very dear to them. And you'd never really have believed that in this day and age that they'd have been able to do it, because it's such a beautiful language, but everything goes the way of the majority these days. It seems like everything's got this kind of Americanization, which is propelling it to kind of uniform kind of ordinariness. And so, this what I see is a kind of the jewel in the Isle, where you've got this beautiful language which has been properly protected, and real effort has been made to protect it. And I think in those circumstances, I think it's an offence to say to the Welsh people that they shouldn't be allowed to call the mountain whatever they want. And if it was a straight contest between Snowdon, which I think just means Snow Hill, which I think in fact sounds more like a kind of fictional London police station, than Widford, which has a kind of beautiful story. I think it's the giant Ritagar, and it's the kind of the covering over the giant as he's been defeated by King Arthur. And I think this is beautiful. But this is the kind of thing that the English, particularly, I don't mean Mike, but the English tend to do this wherever they go. And the closest example I could think of was if you go to Zimbabwe and Zambia, and there you've got this huge cascade of water, and in Sotho it's called Mosi or Tunya, which means the smoke that thunders. And along comes Livingston and says, I think we'll call it Victoria after the Queen. And I think, first of all, it's a slightly how dare you, but this is what they were doing back then. They were going around colonizing people. And I speak as a formerly colonized person. But partly I think what you end up doing when you erase or make an attempt to erase culture is that you erase identity. And that was part of what was going on in this battle whenever colonialism was being spread. They weren't just trying to take land, they were trying to absorb identity and by renaming countries and monuments and areas of natural beauty with their own names, and that's what they're doing. And I think you can't allow that to happen in Wales. Why should you?
Absolutely.
Why should you? This is, in a straight race, it's a much better name anyway. It sounds better. It has better history. It's got everything that going for it. I say the cafe is a distraction. I don't.
Yeah, absolutely. Even nicer is the name for Snowdonia, the mountain range as a whole, which in Welsh is Eryri, meaning the place of eagles. How lovely is that? Anyway, gosh, we've pushed on quite far into the audience participation time, I'm afraid. So I'm going to ask Amy Williams to come in now with questions from the audience. Hi, Amy, are you there?
I am indeed. I am indeed. So we've had a lot of questions, and I'll try to get them as quickly as we can to make sure they're all answered. So the first question that we have is for you, Mike, and it's from Tony. And he says that he really loved Fluke, but Poe is one of his favourite characters of all time. Are they based on real people?
Hi, Tony. Thanks for the question. My editor says that Fluke is like how I am, and Poe is like how I would like to be, which is quite a simplistic thing. I think I would like to have Poe's diet, certainly. There's parts of Poe in me. There's parts of other people in Poe as well. I mean, I think all characters are true imagination is very difficult. So every character tends to be a sort of mishmash of everyone. Anyway, so the simple answer is Poe is like I would like to be. I'd certainly like to eat black pudding every day. That would be absolutely awesome.
Brilliant. And another question from Tony, and this one's for you, Imran. How difficult was it to get a Netflix deal, and how long did the process take?
Oh God. It's well, first of all, I was just very lucky. The whole thing was a fluke, I think. I just happened to get the right producer who they at that time were working with Tom Edge, who wrote the screenplay for The Crown and for the J.K. Rowling stuff. And because he had been working with that producer, they managed to get him to screenwrite this. And because the BBC and Tom were Tom was their darling in a way, and I think whatever he wrote, they would have bought. So I think that was an absolutely key part of it, and nothing to do with me, nothing to do with the book, nothing to do with anything other than a lot of luck, all kind of coalescing at the same time. Once it had got the BBC on board, so what had happened was that they optioned it, I think, in 2017. By 2018, Tom Edge had written the script. Right at the end of 2018, going into 2019, the BBC had green-lit it. But then they kind of give their development funds to the producers, and then once it was kind of fully in train, that's when Netflix boarded and said, yeah, we'll come on board with this. And I think what they do is that they end up giving kind of a whole load of other funding to help to try and make it a better production. But it's very long, and I think they told me that less than 2 or 3% of options make it to screen. So, as I say, it was nothing to do with me. It was just a lot of luck, and I don't think it was anything to do with the book necessarily. It was just I was lucky. Yeah, ages is the answer to it. It takes ages.
lengthy process. While we're on the topic of adaptations, Phil has asked, do you have a personal favourite film adaptation of a crime novel? And that one's for both of you. Should we start with you, Mike?
Yeah, of course. Stop me. I'm going to say The Drop by Dennis Lehane. It was a novella, actually, not a novel. But I watched it recently, and it was just so low key, and it was just an absolutely superb adaptation. I really enjoyed it, and I watch it every time it's on. So I'm going to go with that. So, I mean, if you give me 5 minutes, I'll think of another 20 instead of it. But you went to me first, so now Imran becomes really cool now.
Well, the only one that I can think of is Killing Eve, which I remember watching it, and I remember watching Jodie Comer when she appeared on screen, and she was just mesmerising. And I don't know whether it was that it was just kind of brilliant writing, or whether it was just her and she carried the whole thing, because she was so watchable that almost she could have said and done anything for the whole of that season, and I think I would have been glued to it. There was just something quite magnetic about her. So I don't know whether that's the writing or whether it's anything else, but I'm going to say Killing Eve because, like Mike, I can't think of anything.
The question was about a film anyway, so Imran cheated as far as I'm
You're right.
On the flip side of things, Gwyl has asked, are there any that you think should never have been made in the first place? Imran, we'll start with you.
Ooh. I can't.
Not a controversial subject at all.
One, maybe Lolita.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe Lolita, but because as a book, again, you know, as a novel, something that, well, again, I don't know how he does it. Something that Nabokov does to that subject matter, which, you know, is toxic. You can't write that subject, but he does it in a way which is just, you know, masterful. And I don't think that comes across on screen at all well.
going to say, I don't know that it shouldn't be done. I'm just the way it has been done so far is that it was just awful. And that's The Hobbit, when Peter Jackson, after the sort of triumph that was Lord of the Rings, then I thought The Hobbit was pretty poor, to be honest.
Okay. Phil has a comment more than a question. He would just like to say how much he loves Imran's chair, because it looks like that you're wearing a supervillain style cloak.
But also, if I turned it around, there's gold writing on this. So look, no, it's properly supervillain, and it.
Oh, it reclines too.
But it rocks because it's not an actual grown-up's chair; it's a gaming chair. So I didn't know when I bought it that it would rock. Yeah, so it's a chair.
Looks very luxurious.
Yeah, it is.
We have a question for Mike now from Louise, who would like to know what inspired your upcoming release.
Hi, Louise. That's a good question. And this book is actually, when you get it, if you buy it, and you go to the back, I do actually tell the story of this book. It's the one I wanted to write second, possible. I've had this story, without giving anything away. There's some quite sort of emotive things in, for me personally, as a ex-soldier. But I didn't do it second for reasons that become apparent. There was something quite similar to the puppet show. Not exact, but there was a similar theme. When I then pitched it to my editor for book 3, and I pitched. She said, "Absolutely not. No, it's more like a thriller." And the way I pitched it was then. So I came up with some more ideas, including one about a magician. And she said, magicians are one step below clowns and deserve everything they get. So I had to come up with something, and that was The Curator. So the inspiration, it's a story I've had in the back of my mind for ages. I just didn't have the story quite right. And it wasn't until I combined it with an idea for a heist when nothing was taken. And the only purpose of breaking into a safety deposit vault was to kill somebody on the vault floor. And that's not a spoiler, that happens in the first chapter. It wasn't until I married them two ideas that it came together. So, and it was a long story. It was 140,000 words to start with. So I had to knock 40,000 words off it, which was heartbreaking.
And do your books need to be read in order?
No.
Brilliant. Phil, I'm still monitoring the chat as we go along. And Phil would now like to know, what does the gold writing say, Imran, on your cushion?
It says, this is awful. It says secret lab. Now I do look like
very supervillain vibes. We've got about a minute left, and I'm going to be very selfish now and ask one of my own questions. Michael, if you've seen any of the panels where there's this question, then you'll know. I'm really interested to know what authors' desert island books are. So imagine for a minute that you are stranded on a desert island and you can take 3 books with you. What would those 3 books be? Would either of you like to start?
I'll go first just because I know. Watership Down by Richard Adams. Night Watch by Terry Pratchett, and I think probably Slow Horses by Mick Herron.
Fantastic. Brilliant. I love Watership Down. I think that's come up in quite a few panels that I've asked now. That Watership Down seems to be a firm favourite with lots of people. What about you, Imran? What would you take with you?
I think I would take To Kill a Mockingbird. It was one of the first books that I've read that made me cry, and
My all-time favourite. I named my cat after Atticus Finch.
It's just beautiful. All the characters are just stunning. What's weird is that when Harper Lee's other book came out, the Night Watchman.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would say if you've read To Kill a Mockingbird and you love it, don't read that one. Don't because she ended up making him into a kind of wild racist, which was just.
It reverses his position a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's absurd. I regret ever picking that book up.
Me too. But what was interesting was that was the first book in the line, and it was whoever the editor was had spotted it and said, "Look, I don't like the book, but you've got this character in there which can be brilliant. If you can do something with that, that would be great." And yeah, I thought it was an outstanding. There's also a book called Samarkand, which I've not read it in. I've only read it once, but I remember it as a book which, when I read it, I thought it was the best book I'd ever read. And I think it's by. I've got it there. If you just excuse me for a second, I'll put it out.
That chair. It's something else, isn't it?
It's something else.
Yeah, so it's Samarkand by Amin Maalouf, and it's beautiful. And I'm going to read it again because the memory of it was so strong. But I'm slightly hesitant because what I don't want to do is end up reading it and thinking, "Oh God, this is awful." So I'm keeping my fingers crossed and hoping that it'll be fine. And then finally, I think I would take The Rubaiyats by Omar Khayyam. I don't know, just the idea that somebody is writing in this deeply poetical way about his relationship with God, and this kind of mystical way, and how he compares his love for God with the feeling of being drunk and being lost in this kind of depth of love. There's something about that which is, I find it magical. So I think I would take that with me, and I hope that it would sustain me on a desert island.
Fantastic choices, both of you. Thank you so much. That's it from me. Thank you both for answering the audience questions, and thank you to the audience for sending them in as we've been chatting. And I will leave you in Alice's capable hands.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you.
And thanks everybody for the questions. Before I sign off, because we're almost out of time now, I just do have to ask Mike one last question. When I was going through various things to prepare for tonight, I read that you'd said you should never put a dog in a book. What was that about?
It was actually Peter Robinson said, "Never give your character an eye patch," which translates to never give your character a dog. The reason is everybody wants to know where the dog is. I'll just a very quick anecdote. When I wrote the puppet show, my agent, and I don't know what the exact page numbers were, but we got in touch. I said, it's not really clear who's looking after Edgar on page 67. Edgar being Poe's Springer Spaniel. So I changed that, and I wrote a neighbour into the story who could look after the dog. My editor, when she got the book, it's not clear who's looking after Edgar on page 162. So right, I'll go back and change that. At every stage of the process, somebody noticed something about the dog. It was getting to the point I had to. I'm saying now, the dog's fine. It's got fresh water. It's got look. But when it got to the copy editing stage of the puppet show, which is pretty much the last stage before it goes to proofreading, my copy editor said, according to the timeline that you've got set up, Poe joined the police when he was 11 years old. Now, nobody had noticed that, but every single person has said, where's the dog? Where's the dog? Is the dog okay? You've taken them on a visit, but you haven't said that you've let the car windows down. So it's honestly, it's getting quite problematic. And Poe 5, a lot of the action takes place in London. So I have to be very clear. Edgar is fine. He's on a farm. Don't worry about him. Trust me, I've got a dog. I'm not going to harm the dog.
British people and animals, honestly.
I was going to say, I made the mistake of giving Xander a dog in one of the later drafts. And yeah, I wish I'd spoken to Mike about this, because my editor just said, no, you can't do it. Unless you can do it like Mike can do it, don't bother.
Thank you for the
company, but yeah, you're right.
They are problematic. I have the same with horses in my books. They always have to be dealt with. You can't just leave them somewhere. Anyway, we are now well and truly out of time, I'm afraid, everybody. So it only remains for me to say thank you so much to my two wonderful guests, Mike Craven and Imran Mahmood. Thank you so much to the audience, especially to those of you who've been at every panel of our Gwyl Crime Cymru Festival this year. We really look forward to seeing you next year in the flesh, in Aberystwyth, if at all possible. And don't forget, if you're going to buy either of the books that you've heard about tonight, please consider going to Gwisgo Bookworm. They're on the programme page of our festival website. Diolch yn fawr o galon am ymuno â ni. Hwyl fawr am y tro. Bye, everybody. See you next year.
Bye. Bye.